and a lot of it, skirts on the edges of ethical behavior, to say the least. And some of the best insights in science have actually happened when scientists use both their intuition and their analytical skills. And so that's the type of scientist that I am. And my interest in autism and savants really began with this man here, Oliver Sacks. When I was at Johns Hopkins, he came to speak after he had published his book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And in that book, he talked about these two twins. They were identical twins who had been institutionalized most of their life. And they had, a lot of these autistic individuals have slightly larger heads. And that was true for them. And, but they were very limited in terms of their ability to take care of themselves, which is why they were institutionalized. They also had never been educated. They couldn't do arithmetic, they couldn't, read, they hadn't been taught any of that, and yet they had these savant skills. And one of them was that they played this game where one of them would say a 6-digit prime number, and then the other one would say the 6-digit prime number that followed it. And they would just toss these numbers back and forth in a game. And prime numbers are these numbers that are only divisible by 1 and themselves. And there's no real good algorithm for generating them. And Oliver Sacks was able to use prime number tables to validate their generation of these numbers up to 12 digits. I mean, they were accurate. And they went up to 20, but at the time the computers couldn't keep up with it, so he had no way of validating that. But that shows you that somehow they knew the answer, they knew these prime numbers. They also could do calendar calculation for thousands of years and tell you what day of the week any date appeared. And they said that they didn't derive the answers. They didn't, calculate it out. They just saw the answer. It just appeared in front of them. And when I heard about that, I was like, wow, okay, we need to understand this. This is like, it was so profoundly moving to me that I applied for and received a fellowship to go study with Sir Michael Rudder in England at the Institute of Psychiatry. And he was the world's expert on developmental disorders and autism at the time. And so that's how I got into this, was my interest in savant syndrome. And what happened is that when I was at Harvard, I was at Cambridge Hospital. And I was just down the hall from John Mack. He was the chairman of the department. And I had deep respect for John, but I had no idea at the time that I was there that he was doing the work with people who had these abduction experiences. That was something that I found out after I'd left Harvard. But John and I had this relationship because we were both very concerned about nuclear war. And so we were both physicians for social responsibility, really interested in that. And so when I was there at Cambridge Hospital, the reason I bring this up is that when I was at Cambridge Hospital, my position was to do psychiatric consultations on the medical and surgical floors. And I was asked to consult on this woman who wanted to sign out of the hospital against medical advice. And the staff thought she was mentally ill. And you can't leave a hospital. If they deem you to be mentally incompetent, to understand really the decision you're making, you can't leave the hospital. You know, they can keep you there. And so that's why the reason they brought me in. They said, well, you know, we've got somebody who's really crazy here. You know, we just need you to come and, you know, see her and then sign the paperwork. And so I go to see this person, and she's this very statuesque, half African-American, half Native American woman. And one of the first things she says to me is, I'm psychic, and I know that my tests will come back normal. She had been admitted the night before for a possible heart attack, and back then, it would take a day or more for you to get the blood work back to check the enzymes to see if the heart had been damaged. And so we were still waiting on that blood work to come back. And she said, I know it's going to come back normal, so I want to go. And she said, and also there's all these ghosts here, and it's just really freaking me out. And I said to her, I said, well, you know, you're in a hospital, so, you know, if any place has ghosts, it's probably this place. And, you know, and I just thought, I thought this one's very interesting, and I really don't believe in, you know, yes, I could have just at that point, you know, based on my training, said, okay, this woman obviously is not making, you know, a rational decision here, and I could have signed the paperwork to keep her. But I didn't want to do that. That's just not my style. I wanted to gain her cooperation to stay. And I said to her, I said, well, you know, can we just talk some more about this? And she said, sure. She said, I have this, I was born with a caul over my face, you know, so that's when the afterbirth, you know, is kind of adhered to the face, and it cuts off your oxygen for a period of time.